Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's Donna Cravata, and we are here again with our monthly wisdom panel. This panel is titled Storytelling. It's How We're Wired. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of everybody on the panel, and then we're going to get into a great conversation. If you are in the audience or listening on the replay, please chime into the conversation, tag us if you're on the replay, and we will come back and keep the conversation going. And let's do it. So, first we have Lee Aldridge. She's a brand strategist, communications specialist, and the founder of Soul Story Creative. Gail Harris is a ghostwriter, award-winning women's memorist, and founder of Golden Ghostwriting. Maggie Van Galen is a wordsmith, editor, and award-winning children's book author, including the beloved King's Day Out series. And Yvonne Caputo is a storyteller, teacher, psychotherapist, corporate trainer, and author of 2 books about her dad, Flying with Dad and Dying with Dad. And we had one more guest who was not available to be with us today. She lost her voice, but hopefully she'll chime in from the comments. I would love to see her here. But Diane, I always say her last name wrong. I hope I'm going to say it right. Wzyga is an origin story co-creator, communication change maker, facilitator, podcaster, and the founder of Quarter Moon Story Arts. So be sure to check her out as well. And let's dive in. Let's start with, I'm going to kick it off with the everything is story. So let's start with how story created a change in your life. Gail, do you want to start?
Sure. I always thought in terms of words and story. I started out as an ad copywriter. As I said before, we have to tell a story to our, like our client has a story to tell that's going to make them stand out from everybody else. So a story is a message. And it was really when I got into my own story, my story of healing and spiritual healing for me, that I started writing books. I wrote a self-help book at first, which has a lot of personal information in it. And that the natural segue for me from that was becoming a women's memorist, helping women tell their stories for the purpose of healing. I think healing, story has a universal healing to it for the woman telling her story, and then also the reader reading it, because we have different experiences in our life, but we're also much more alike than we are different. And story heals us all.
Yeah, it really does. Maggie?
Yeah, I think everything is a story. I've used, as I've always said, I've been able to, I've written since I could hold a pen. And I've used words and stories throughout life for different things. I wrote through my teen years to deal with my teen stuff. But and I've written poetry, children's books, I've written for business. I still write for business. So, and everything is a story. It doesn't have to be a long story, but it is a story that tells the journey of yourself, your product, whatever it may be. So I think you find storytelling is everywhere.
Lee?
Yes, just thank you guys for your contribution there. It sparked me. I mean, my mother was a consummate storyteller. She made life a story. And in some ways that was great. In other ways it was like, not sure about that. But that's the thing, story has power. And it does permeate us because it's our innate being. We're wired for it, like your subtitle says. And story has, through music, I listened to music as a teenager with story. I was a professional photographer of weddings and people and businesses for over 30 years. And that's all I did was photojournalistic style photography, which the opposite of that would be the more portrait traditional, where somebody's made up, they have on a particular outfit, but the photography can tell a story as well through images. And now, through brands, if we can put ourselves in someone else's service or offer, that's the goal.
Yeah. And Yvonne?
I said earlier, story began with my mother, taking me to the library. And I was an early reader, but I can remember being so involved in the story. I would get into a book and you wouldn't know that I was there. And that ability to be so transported was something that I learned to use when I became a teacher. I found out very quickly that the workbooks or the book itself was not where the learning happened. The learning happened through the story. And in particular, I'll talk about Canada Goose that I got friendly with on my, where I lived on this big acreage. And daily I would come into the classroom and I would tell them about Magic. That was her name. And one time after I was telling the story, I walked out into the corridor and one of my students approached me and she said, "Miss Caputo, how is it that you get to do so many of these wonderful things?" And I said to her, and I hope it really captured her, "I'm just living my dream." So stories are a way to help us dream.
I love that. Let's pick up on that. Like, how have stories like created change in your life? Like, made you realize a dream maybe you didn't even know you had?
Well, I sign all of my books, Always Follow Your Dreams, because I still pinch myself when people say, "Oh, you're the children's book author," because it's so surreal. Like I sort of fell into it, right? From telling stories to my kids to thinking, "Oh, I'll leave a legacy for my kids and just get it published, just nothing fancy. I just want to have it in print," to now it's like a series and I have my second series going. And when I do school readings, I always tell the kids, I'm like, I sign the books, Always Follow Your Dreams, because you should always have that dream in front of you. And life isn't always a straight path. I mean, there's bumps and detours and, flat tires along the way. But if you have that dream in front of you, you will eventually, strive to get there. So that's kind of how I see it.
I feel like this is where imagination pops to help us dream, to have us to build a story around, I'm just thinking of a couple of dreams I have now, and I love that was brought up because it is how I can be conscious in my dreaming to create what I want in life through story, making a story about, I'm walking through the park. It's kind of like Dr. Joe's mind movies, isn't it? Telling that story of a future event.
Yeah. I think story brings us together because we all have dreams. It's part of being human. And so when we read somebody else's story, and we read about their dream, that enables us to connect into the part of us that has a dream as well. So it's a connector. It's a direct. We're not separate from each other. We're so much more alike than different. And for me, that's what it comes down to with story. It brings us together. We can see ourselves in other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the campfire.
The dream for me, probably pretty early on, was to have a deep relationship with my dad. Greatest Generation, though, his job in his mind was food on the table and a roof over the head. But to sit down and talk to his daughter in a way that was fruitful was just not something that he did. But when he started to tell me his story about being in World War II, all of a sudden I began to understand the man I always wanted to know. And because I listened to him in this kind of rapture, he began to loosen up and to tell me things that were the kinds of things that I wanted to hear. So through the dream, and you talked about this, Gail, I got the relationship with my dad that I always wanted. And he got a daughter that he didn't know he had. So that's something that story can do for us. So it makes me say, not only can we create through story, but we can listen for story.
Yeah.
And that brought you and your dad together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did he
And
realize that as well? He felt that.
He was released from the hospital. I had just been on the other side of the state to see him. And he called me. He was livid. And my father was livid. You held the phone out here, because that's the way it was. And he finally said, honey, can you come home? I'm scared. And I got in the car and drove 6.5 hours. And 2.5 hours after I was in my childhood home, he was gone. But he trusted me to get there in time to make sure that his death was according to his wishes. He wanted to go feet first out of his own home. And because the closeness that we had gotten through the storytelling, he made me his healthcare agent. So I had the legal right to speak for him when he couldn't speak for himself. So absolutely, that connection with my dad came through story, where he began to realize that he could count on me.
And this didn't happen until later in life, because you didn't write your books until you were into your 70s.
Yeah. The first book came out when I was 72. The second book came out when I was 75. The journey of getting to know Dad was in my early 60s. That storytelling and his passing away.
So there's such an incredible lesson just in that alone. Like, there's time.
I think that's the beautiful thing about storytelling too, right? Is that it doesn't have to be an immediate thing. It can be I always think that everybody has a book in them, or a story to tell. And it can be at any stage in your life, really, right? It can just, and it doesn't, kind of like dreams, they don't always manifest themselves at the beginning. It may, simmer and over time. So.
But then what's the reason for sharing your story?
Yeah.
And look at the entry point. It's anywhere. Yvonne, you met your dad at an entry point that he could open up. And that you if he'd opened up right away, it might have been, whoa, for you too. But for story is just convertible, flexible, and magical. It just works. And that is like an epitome example to me.
Yeah. One of the things I learned through this entire project, and to date, I've done 63 interviews, and this is our 9th panel, is that, we reach a point in life where we start to embrace our own stories. Maybe things that we didn't think about for a while or pushed away because there was no time or we stopped believing in them. But we reach a point where we have some space that maybe we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago, where we can really start to view ourselves through a different viewpoint. because we have the space to maybe do something about it, and it doesn't feel so disappointing or far away. And it's just been absolutely incredible to watch what I mean, we're up to about 115 women now, and what everybody is doing when they have the time and the space to do it. They're truly following their hearts, and the heart is connected to their story. And it could be something that happened when you were a child. It could be something that happened in a prior generation that you weren't aware of, like Yvonne connecting to the stories of her dad, or Maggie, like, you got a dog and that turned into like an entire series of books, and then Lee, you've taken your photography and you've turned it into something totally entirely different that's helping businesses grow. And Gail, you've taken your own personal stories and the experience that you've gained from ads, which probably never really felt good to you, into helping women, connect with all these parts that they may have lost along the way. I mean, I think it's just so incredibly inspiring, and we all have so much to contribute, and there are so many things that we shouldn't lose. There's a woman in this group. Her name is Angela Todd, and she's an activist and an archivist, and she helps women gather their stories and tell the stories of their families, and then she gets them into archives and libraries and towns and things like that. But it's incredibly powerful how this is changing towns and generations of families, because there are things that they just didn't know. And I think that we're at an inflection point because technology is changing so quickly that if we don't capture some of these things now, they might be lost forever, because everything's going to move so quickly. So I really do think that we're in a place where we have to collect these things. We have to talk about these things. It's our responsibility to bring it forward to the next generation.
Well,
I think. Go ahead.
well, I just feel like I've seen story permeating the world on all levels. And what I mean by that is just learning through story, healing through story. Gail, I am so glad you brought that up. That is what 12-step groups are made of. I don't feel isolated anymore. Oh, it's not only, maybe I can do this thing.
Right. And
that relating and that collective healing that is not only healing our past, it's healing our past so we can let it go and be okay with that, meeting your dad where you are, whatever that looks like. But it's the going forward, the ripple effect that you're creating, with this healing. It's phenomenal,
Yeah, because why story? Why is story so powerful? When we tell our own story, it could be the first step to self-acceptance, because when we can accept our own story, accept our life and what happened to us without resisting it or whatever we do as human beings, when we can embrace our own story, we're embracing ourselves. It's self-acceptance, and that leads to self-love, and then we're golden, no matter what happens to us. That's why it's so powerful.
Yeah, and it's how we're wired. So that's what people react to. When we show the vulnerability of sharing our own story, people feel like, oh, if she's going to go there, I'm going to go there too. And then they start to see the similar threads of, oh, well, she went through this, I went through this. Mine was a little different, but it still has the same kind of impact. Or, they just start to feel themselves in your stories, and that makes them feel validated. That makes them feel seen. And then the barriers come down.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever
and themselves in the other person.
Yes.
And that's really true, because my publisher, we were on a Zoom call, and she said, I think you've got 3 more books in you. What do you think you'd like to write about? Okay. And so I gave her my 3, and she came back and she said something about another book coming out of Flying with Dad. and she suggested dying with Dad.
Mm-hmm.
It came from her. And her thing to me was, the people who are reading your first book want to know how you could let your dad go. Where did you find the courage? Okay. How did it happen? Well, the passion I have around the second book is the healing that can take place when we face death and dying. When we talk about death and dying. Gail, when you say, when we tell it, when we put it out there, you know, that it isn't something that we're holding in. So there's very much healing that takes place for me, and that I would love to have for other people who sit down with their loved ones and say, here's a document. Let's talk about it. How do you want your end to look like? What do you want to have it be? Because when I think about my father, do I miss him? Absolutely. Would I want to make one more pot roast dinner for him? You betcha. But something that I have with his death that I don't have with any other deaths is a profound sacred joy.
Mm-hmm.
He trusted me with letting him go. So the healing that can come from doing the tough stuff, which is talking about death and dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is universal. See, that's the thing. We can't get away from that. It's like everybody's going to die. Everybody's father is going to die. And also what you offer is a relationship between a daughter and a father. I mean, who can't heal from hearing your story?
Right.
So I want to say with that, how much I appreciate those of you on this panel who help us put those stories on paper. You know, how you help us to take the vision that we have and then craft it in a way that it becomes this blossoming flower.
Yep.
So I really appreciate those of you who do that kind of work.
Yeah. Editing is key.
It is. It is. And I think editing is I mean, I write stories and I send them out to professional editing. I also professionally edit other people's work, and it's the being able to be removed from your story and your personal, you know, connection with your story that allows the editor to do that, because we're looking at it through a completely different lens, right? Looking at it from a very objective, does this paragraph make sense here, or does this word better than that word, you know? So editing for the viewers is way more than just grammar and spelling. It's, you know, it is content and flow and what makes sense and how does it all go together. And so I appreciate
It's not optional. I'm working with a client now that she's finishing up her book and she didn't want to work with an editor. And I was like, no, you just have not worked with the right editor.
Yeah.
And I introduced her to a couple of people and she ended up finding somebody that she really clicked with. And she's like really excited about the process now because it's somebody that can really take what you've like almost like dumped. You know, it's like you've released all of this stuff out into the world and somebody needs to polish that up. And
Yep.
So that we can understand it and assimilate so that I can repeat it.
Yeah.
That's what my goal is if I can take who you are and what you stand for and why I should care and translate that into a digital language that lands with just the right people in their heart, you know, like, oh yeah, I get that. And then they're walking around and they're saying, hey, Maggie, did you know that Gail was talking about these steps, you know, and that's how she writes these ghostwrite, you know, and Maggie's become Gail's brand ambassador because it's distilled down into something that's memorable and repeatable I understand. And the only way that I know how to do it is give it all to me. Just put it all out there. And then I put it, I just have, it just works. Categories. And then what happens is your thought leadership comes out, your signature system comes out, you throw your stories in there, take it to Gail or Maggie or Yvonne, and they're going to make it into a book that you just can't wait to get on stage and talk about without notes. Because it's you.
Because it's you. Yeah.
Because it's you. You don't need notes.
Yeah.
When I saw the first red lines through what I had written, I was like, oh, that kind of thing. And my publisher then sent me back something of a very noted writer with the red lines through it. And I thought, okay, all right. So once I got past that, what happened was she saw a bigger dream than I had ever thought about. Right. She took my third draft, threw it in a blender, and said, this is what I think you should do with it. Never saw it. And when I now hold either of those books, I am able to say she saw what I couldn't see because I was too into what it was that I had written.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, because I think editing and proofreading also gives the writer the permission or comfort or license to just put it down. Like, just get your story out. It doesn't matter if it's spelled correct. I tell the kids when I do lessons in school, just throw up on a piece of paper. Like, give it all to me. There's nobody's going to correct your spelling, your grammar, nothing. Just get it out there and then go back and look at it. Mm-hmm. And then go back and say, oh, you know what? There's this other little story that would make so much sense here. There's this other little maybe photo that would add to the story. There's an illustration that would add to the story. And the editing allows the writer to sort of just get it out.
Right. I have an interesting story based on what Yvonne and Maggie just said. I wrote a memoir for a client, and when we first started working together, she had adopted her daughter, and she wanted to tell the story of why her name was Brandy and her daughter's name is Zoe, why Zoe's birth mother chose to place her baby for adoption rather than parenting. My client didn't want to be in the book at all, and I wanted to get that project. I was drawn to it because I'm an adoptive mom, so it was a strong pull there for me. So she hired me to write this book. And the minute she started talking, well, first of all, she was deaf. And I didn't even know that because a lot of it was emailing back and forth. But we started working. And the minute she opened her mouth and started telling her story, I just saw a humongous, bigger story than she wanted to tell, and which was her memoir. But, again, she didn't want to be in the book. And, but when I presented it to her, she bought into it, and she had a platform, and it turned out to be a very, very complex story. There are 3 different levels to the story. It's about trusting ourselves. It's about growing up deaf in America in the 1970s and 80s. And the 3rd level is about how the universe conspires to bring us what we need. Because she had always wanted a daughter. She had given birth to 3 sons, and she felt that if I don't have a daughter, my life will not be fulfilled. So they were going to adopt a girl from China, and then a whole series of things. I'm not going to go into it now, but how she and Zoe found each other based on the very, very painful, difficult decisions that the birth mother faced, the birth father, first set of adoptive parents. They all just trusted their own selves, what's right for them and what's right for this little baby. And because of that, Brandy and Zoe found each other. And it was a much bigger story than she had originally wanted to tell. It was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and that can happen because if it's just us that's considering our stories,
Right.
we think like, who's going to really care about this? Like, does it really matter? Oh, this is just my story. And when somebody else sees it, they see the recognition in it. Like, I was Diane, who was supposed to be on this panel today, but she was not feeling well. She posts up these posts on LinkedIn asking people to share different stories and things like that. And I posted up this little story about how we moved when I was like 3 years old from the 5th floor to the 4th floor of an apartment building, and I wanted to help. And I just took this giant pickle jar and I was walking down this big flight of steps with this giant pickle jar, and I dropped the pickle jar, and it created like all of this pandemonium because of this dropped pickle jar. And she said, I'll never be able to think about you without being this little girl and a giant pickle jar ever again. So like, you think of these stories as inconsequential, but they become like attached to your persona, to your personality, to who you are, how you're represented to people. And you really do need to, the only way that you know what they really mean is when you share them with people, because now they change. When you share them with people, there's like new air breathed into them. And there's something different. One thing I'd love to know, Maggie, is like, how has your dog taken on like different, like, life through the stories that you share about him with kids?
So it's really funny because the King's Day Out series started because I took him to the car wash, not to get washed, but just that he was in the car with me. And his reactions to all of the things happening in the car wash, the bubbles, people scrubbing the windows, the smells coming through the vents, I thought it was cute. So I took a picture of him or a video, because I'm one of those weird dog moms. And then fast forward, shared it with a friend of mine whose son has a chromosomal disorder, and some of the presentation has a sensory challenge to it. And she said, oh my God, you have to write a story about this. So long story short, I met my co-author, who's a doctor of pediatric OT. We did this together because that's not my area of expertise. But the kids love the fact that King is the one that is having all of the challenges. And the hero of the story is a neurodiverse child that's able to explain what tools he's learned, right, in OT to overcome those sensory challenges. And so, and my dog is like, he's a 135-pound Bernese mountain dog, full of love and slobber and fur. And he is the biggest baby in the world. He's afraid of stairs. He's afraid of thunder. He's afraid of, bridges. He's afraid of waves in the water. And, people look at him, they get this reaction that he's like, oh, he's this big dog with a big bark, but he's just a big love. Right. And so, and I just did a reading the other day at a local bookstore, and they're like, oh, can you bring him in? Can you bring him in? I'm like, I would love to, but he doesn't love new places. He doesn't, so he is actually the dog in the book. We're working on trying
He
to.
just doesn't want to be the face of the brand. He's going to defer to you, Maggie.
Right. He's actually camera shy too. Like every time I go to take his picture, he's like, oh, thank you.
Well, it's going to be the side of his head yeah.
I have to say thank you, Maggie, because we have a Bernedoodle.
Okay.
And she is afraid of everything.
Yeah.
So now, it's this ancestry thing that helps to explain to me. She's also from a puppy mill, so she's got two things now. But thank you for the story of your Burmese mountain dog.
Yeah, he is a total yeah, he's a total baby. Like he's
Mhm.
still like, curls up with you, and when it's thundering, he cowers underneath me. And so, yes.
But look at his contribution. It's like everyone has a unique story that is worth sharing, even neurodivergent. And
Yep.
this is how he is bringing them into purpose. They may be the best animal handlers or communicators on the planet. We get to see that in others through story. When we really dig in, and who are you? Who are you?
Well, we can normalize for people.
Mm-hmm.
We can say, you're okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the beauty of story too, where someone who is reading our story says, okay, I see me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here. And this is what it means to be here.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people want to share their story because they feel that somebody else might benefit from hearing it.
Yes.
I used to think that. I used to think I've got to tell my story. It's just, there's so many chapters to it and this and that. But now I'm just like, what was said, it's like, no, and it's almost like social media. What do I have to say beyond, what my profession is? And what you're talking about bringing out is my own thought leadership. Because
Mm-hmm.
we can't read our own label. I can't, and much less copy edit it. I'd have a house full of paper of all of the things that I think are so relevant and poignant or junky, and she'll take care of it. But it's just amazing how you can craft a real memoir or a storybook to relate. Any of you guys. Yeah, we read stories we see ourselves in. That's
But
right.
I think that's like one of the from a business perspective and writing posts for social media, blog posts, whatever, like the catchphrase of be authentic
Yeah.
is like huge, right? Like when you're writing for business, you should write with your voice, not somebody else's. You should write how you feel. And I think that in itself is the storytelling piece. So,
Yeah.
you have it in the title of your company, Lee, Soul Story Creative. Like you're telling a story,
Mm-hmm.
or you're telling other people's stories. So,
Right.
but
I love
we all
that.
use our own experiences to get there.
This makes me think beyond something. This is an aha moment.
Oh.
About how in the storytelling process we're involved in a relationship, in a relationship with our editor, in a relationship with the proofreader, that it makes us connect in a way that's hopefully, and I'm looking at 4 other people here, that's deeply satisfying. I really feel like my editor and publisher, she gets me.
Mm-hmm.
She gets me in a way that a lot of people haven't gotten me. So Gail, here's healing again.
Mm-hmm.
That there's someone out there that understands to the core who you are and what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's also a relationship with your own story. And like Lee was mentioning earlier, that like she wanted to share her story in the past, but maybe she doesn't want to now. But what you're going through is the editing process of your own story, because
Right.
there are parts that are relevant to share, and there are parts that just need to go away.
Well, and that's what power positioning is. I mean, we are multifaceted. We have many, many, many stories. We are stories. But when you want to get the attention of people you want to serve, that you're here uniquely qualified to serve, well, there's 2 things here. what is your unique, distinct thing that you love to do, that you're uniquely qualified, meaning it's natural for you, you're educated, you're knowledgeable, you're wise about it. But then who is it that's going to resonate and receive that positioning, that power positioning? I mean, I'm a brand strategist and communications person. You know, I love those questions. Who are you? What do you stand for? And really codifying that. But when we really look at positioning, if I told you how I feel about our food animals, I mean, I would get camaraderie like, yeah, no, or well, you're a little dramatic about it, but it isn't anything to do with what my service is. So it dilutes that part of the story. So just like editing my memoir, you know, what part goes in, where does it go, what order? That's what I do as a brand strategist, is get that power positioning first. A lot of brand people, you know, well, who do you want to serve? Let's go do some market research and really build that persona. And then I'm going to get you to put your left arm over here and make sure you can get your ankle over here so you can sell them that thing. And some people will buy it.
Yeah. But what you
doesn't feel what you're supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Well, you shared it right before we went live. You shared a quote that 92% of buyers want brands to make their marketing feel like a story. And, you know, because the story is what we're wired to hear, to accept, to buy into. And it's not even about making the sale, because, you know, as human beings, if we all walk into a room together, you're not going to walk in there and say, hey, this is my name, buy my stuff. You're going to try to connect with people first. And, you know, whether you're writing a book, whether you're writing content for marketing, you want to create that connection first. And before you can understand who your audience is, you have to understand who you are. And like, what do you have to offer? And, you know, what are the parts of you that need to kind of move you forward? And what are the parts of you that are just kind of space junk and need to go away? And you're right. And then it's the who. But it's, you know, it's really so much more simpler than it's made out to be.
Yeah.
When I went for my ghostwriting certification, the first thing we learned was how to find the gold in somebody's story. And that's actually the basis for my company, Golden Ghostwriting. But every story has its unique in some way. And so the ghostwriter's job, and I specialize in memoir, but the ghostwriter's job is to find what's unique about this manuscript, or what's unique about that story. That's the gold. And that's what they have to offer that's different than every other memoir out there. There's a lot of different memoirs. So it really is that strategy, you know, like what's the point of difference here?
So
Unique selling proposition. It's for books as well as products.
Yeah. It's the same. Story is everything.
Yeah, it is. So when you're doing the scale, like what happens to you? Like what's like what happens physically to you? Like where you know that you found it.
Oh my God. I could talk for 5 hours about that. But another thing I want to share is that the second thing we learn, and this connects to the editing and having somebody who's distant be able to bring out the best in your story. But Ghostwriting Psych 101 is, it's not my book. Because as writers, we want to share, we want to put ourselves on the page. And so like, that's the first thing that you have to learn is when you're writing somebody's story, it's not your story, you know, so get yourself off the page. So that said, this is just really interesting. I'm working with an author now, and we have a very unique parallel in our lives. We both are parents to a child that has significant mental health issues. And so I'm working with her, and oh my gosh, am I learning so much about myself and my own journey as a mother parenting my son. I mean, it's incredible. So I feel what's personal there for me, and at the same time, because I just have enough life experience and enough professional experience, is that I could put on that marketing hat and understand that, yes, I am a mother, but I can see how all mothers would really be interested and can gain something from learning how to, parent your child, and how to, at a certain point, you have to step back and have the child, it's their journey, and so it's amazing. It's amazing, like, just having to juggle all of that. But I'm learning so much about myself. See, that's the thing. Like, we learn so much from sharing our story, writing our story, sharing it, whether verbally or writing. And we learn so much from reading other people's stories. As I said before, we see ourselves. It's like, it's that universal, we're all the same, it doesn't really matter. But I feel like I have I feel like I gain the most, because when I work with somebody and I help them tell their story, oh my gosh, do I learn about myself. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, even just doing these interviews every week, it's changed me in ways that I don't even know how to put into words.
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, I kind of be patient with it. And I, like, it'll reveal itself when it's ready to reveal itself. And then I get antsy and I'm like, but I want to know.
Oh yeah, well, you have to let the story, the process, the writing process reveal itself. You have to be led by where the story wants to take you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many incredible women in this group, and a good majority of them are older than me. They're in their 60s and their 70s, some into their 80s, and just to see the possibilities that are available to us as we're getting older. We don't have to stop. We can rewrite that story over and over and over again, and add the new things that are coming into our sphere. But does anybody else
claim that story?
Claim it. Yes. But does anybody else
want to ultimate? But it only comes through self-love, right? That you can claim it.
Yeah, because otherwise you get static.
You gotta accept. Somebody said something about acceptance. We gotta accept. We gotta love ourselves and see our magnificence in order to claim it. And society wants us. We were talking about it a minute ago. It's anywhere but there. I'm not looking there. Oh yeah, going on down. No, but anywhere but there. And that's what we need to look at and be together on. And story gives us the safe place.
That's the power.
Anywhere but there, so we can evolve and heal collectively.
Yes.
That's the power, that we're talking about here.
Okay,
well, so I would add that you should tell your story even if you don't have plans to publish or to put it out there. I have, I have like literally binders of stories that I've written, cocktail napkins, scrap pieces of paper that may or may not ever see the light of day, but I had to get them out. Because I think that's also useful in the sort of healing process, is to get the story out, whether you share it or not.
Yeah.
Just,
As a psychotherapist, that's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And for many things, journaling, something that nobody is ever going to read. You don't, but and no commas, no periods, no spelling, just free flow, whatever it was. I had a client and we connected long after she and I stopped working together. She had 12 books where she had continued to journal. And she said that was something that kept her steady, that kept her grounded, was knowing that no matter how bad it got, from a variety of different issues. She could always just go and get that book out and tell her story.
Yeah.
I believe it was Wayne Dwyer who said, "Don't die with your story inside of you." And
Yeah.
Yeah.
when Yvonne, when I learned of your story and the books that you've written about your dad, that was the first thing that came to mind. That he didn't die with his story inside of him because you brought it forth for him.
Oh, yeah.
He was in the hospital in 2009, and it was Christmas time, and he always managed to land himself in the hospital at Christmas because no family was around him. And he was such a character that the staff always doted on him and, just made Christmas something more pleasurable than just being by himself. Well, I handed him the first draft of the book. That was his Christmas present that year. And my husband had left to gas up the car and do all kinds of things. So it was just Dad and I in the hospital room. And I turned to him and I said, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you." And this is my father's words. "What the hell for?" "Dad,
Sounds like my
for
dad.
your service."
Yep.
And he said to me, "No, honey, I'm proud of you. You wrote the book."
Mm.
And I knew in that statement that he didn't fear going because now he was on paper.
Yeah.
Who he was going to be alive for forever.
Yeah.
And that you're right, that's a gift beyond anything.
Yeah. Yeah. There's really something to that. And now, we can share our stories in so many different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be a book, or maybe somebody just has one book in them, but that one book could turn into so many other things. Maybe the writing process was just really hard and not enjoyable or too expensive or whatever the case may be. But I mean, we have blogs, we have social media, we have podcasts, we have audio, we have all kinds of places and ways that we can share our stories, that where they can touch people, where they can help us heal ourselves. One thing that kind of, like, as I was preparing for this interview, that each of you touched upon, and Diane as well, this was a big part of what Diane as part of her brand, but nature, and like how your stories
Yeah.
come out through nature. So maybe we've got about 8 minutes left. So maybe if we could talk a little bit about that, because it seems to be something that's meaningful to each of you.
Yeah. For sure. Nature is my everything. Like stories. There's just something that happens to any of us when we get outside. I mean, I remember my little pre-8-week, baby, that the only thing that would console her would be to just go outside, and there's just something about the chaos of nature and its ultimate magnificent beauty that allows me to be okay with whatever is going on. It calms down somehow, and I'm okay. But I'm very intentional now. I hike barefoot, I forest bathe is probably what you'd probably call what I call it a woods waddle. I just kind of waddle around, see which way the wind blows me, or Rosie tells me which direction. But nature for me is everything.
I love cross-country skiing. I am one of those rare birds that doesn't like the summer, that likes the winter, and loves the snow. And one of the chapters in my book is how much of life I was taught through cross-country skiing. Some days there would be this soft, pristine snow that I could just scoot right through. And some days it would be so thick that I would have to stomp through it in order to cut a trail. And then there were days that it was slop, but I was still out there. But there were so many, many vital life lessons that happened for me on my cross country skis.
I love that
Amazing.
story.
Amazing. Do you want to share one?
It was New Year's Eve. We were living on 44 acres of land. And that's when friends came to us because we were so far from the city. And everybody's around the fire and it's warm and toasty. And I said, I'm going out. I want to go out on my skis. It was 20 degrees below zero. And so I put on every layer that I could think of. I had a balaclava. I had a hat on top of that. A friend lent me his down jacket, and it was moonlight. And I just went down the trail that I normally do. And I got to an open space where I was about ready to cross a pond. And the pond is frozen stiff. So I know that it's safe for me to cross it. So if you can imagine the moon and the snow just sparkling because it's so cold. And I'm as toasty warm as I can be. And I rounded the corner, and didn't I make enough noise to kick up a quail? So a quail flies off in this. And I ended up climbing a hill, which made it lovely to come home, because the last thing I was going to do after being out for like an hour or so is just come gliding down that hill. So if I think about a ski that is so memorable, it's that one.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
It is.
Anybody else? Any other stories that they'd like to share about nature, how it maybe impacted your story?
I'll go quickly. I think for me, nature is that helps me get out of myself, out of my small self and out of me and my problems and my emotions. You just like realize, oh my God, boy, was I distracted. There's so much more. I'm so much more than my problems, And so Sunday night, I was on my deck. I was like the first day that I was actually like, it's deck time, it's that time of year. And so I was looking outside, and there was a lot of bushes and trees and off into the distance, but through this one little like hole, I could see the sunset. I couldn't believe it, because normally it's not in the right direction from my house, but there it was, this bright sun shining like a million miles away. And I was just like watching the sunset, and it was so symbolic to me because there was a message to me there. I created it. I guess I wanted to see it, but there was a very powerful message for me where the sun, you don't think you always have that light, but there it is, and it was guiding me, and I connected it in particular to something that I was working through within myself over the weekend. And so, if I was writing my memoir, that would be part of my story, what that sunset meant to me.
Right.
I hope you wrote that down. Tucked it away somewhere.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we are almost out of time. I always am amazed at how fast these go. But what I like to do is I like to leave everybody with a wisdom bomb, something that is short, actionable, something meaningful. So, just something that they could walk away with and remember this hour that we spent together.
Well, I would say actionable is write it down. Whatever's on your mind, write it down, get it out. Don't worry about how it looks or how it feels. Just get your story out.
If you're with someone who is older, or even with someone who is younger, and they start to tell a story, get quiet and say, tell me more.
Oh, I love that. Lee, Gail?
I would say trust your story, because when you trust your story, you're trusting yourself.
And I would say be a rebel, because we live in a time and in a society that profits from our self-doubt. So liking ourselves is a rebellious act. It doesn't take much to be a rebel.
Oh, you made me drop my pen.
Oh, good.
Mic drop moment.
Love it. Thank you.
All right, we have a few. Okay, just people saying thank you.
Wonderful.
And I hope we made a little bit of difference in somebody's day. And yeah, there we go. Rebel your self-doubt. God, I love that.
There you go.
But thank you all for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for just showing up and being you and sharing your stories and how important they are. And I hope this encourages people to rebelize themselves. And we will be back. Yeah, I love doing these. I could do this every day. And we'll be back tomorrow with an interview, every Wednesday at noon Eastern with an interview, and once a month with these panels. And I absolutely love them. If you're watching on the replay, please tag us, and we'll keep this conversation going. Share your stories, share them with us, share them with the world, share them with yourself, and let's all be healthy and happy storytellers, because that's really the thing that's going to drive everything that's going to make a difference. So we will be back again and again and again, and I look forward to hearing more and more stories. Thank you, everybody.